The photograph does not exist, but if it did, it would show this. 7 children standing in front of a wall that glitters like a cathedral window, holding up fistfuls of strawberries the size of quarters, their faces stunned with joy. Behind them, the Utah desert stretches brown and merciless to the horizon. The wall holds anyway. 3 weeks before that photograph would have been taken, on a Tuesday morning in late March, Dinah Vale sat in the back of a borrowed wagon watching Red Hollow Crossing shrink behind her. The freighter driving her family's goods had said something she couldn't stop turning over. Desert don't give. It just takes. Dinah had looked at her 6 brothers and sisters huddled in the wagon bed and thought, then we'll have to be the ones who give. The claim had belonged to their father, Joseph Vale, who had filed on it 2 years prior, with the cheerful confidence of a man who had never tried to farm alkaline hardpan in a territory where rain came like an apology, late, insufficient, and quickly forgotten. He had died of a chest fever in February, their mother having preceded him by 3 winters. What he left behind was a single-room sod house, a hand pump that worked on good days, 40 acres of nothing, and 7 children ranging from Dinah at 20 down to Annie, who had just turned 6 and still sometimes called out for their mother in the night. Dinah was the oldest. That was the whole of her qualification. Ephraim, 17, was strong and willing, but prone to long silences that worried her. Ruth, 15, had their mother's practicality and their father's stubbornness, which in combination made her either very useful or very difficult depending on the hour. Gideon, 13, could fix almost anything mechanical, a talent that seemed cosmically unfair given that they owned almost nothing mechanical. Willa, 10, was the one who noticed things. The angle of shadows, which clouds meant weather, where the jackrabbits ran. Seth, 8, was loud and warm and ate more than seemed geometrically possible for a child his size. Annie carried a cloth rabbit named Potato and treated every living creature, including beetles, with grave ceremonial respect. They arrived at the claim on a Wednesday. The freight road ran directly alongside their property's eastern edge, and all day long wagons ground past in both directions, the drivers glancing over with expressions that ranged from neutral to pitying. The soil in the yard was pale and crusted. 3 attempts at a kitchen garden in previous seasons had left behind nothing but a bare rectangular patch of broken earth outlined with rotting stakes. But the ground around the path to the pump glittered. Dinah noticed it the first evening. Crouching down to find the soil was littered with fragments of colored glass. Amber, cobalt, green, a deep cranberry red, catching the low sun and throwing tiny prisms across the dirt. She picked up a piece the color of a cloudless sky and held it until it was warm. She did not yet know what it was for. She only knew she wasn't going to throw it away. The answer came from the freight road. On their 4th day, a Californian botanist named Mr. Aldous Ferris stopped his wagon to water his horse at their pump and noticed Ruth's failed garden patch with the look of a man reviewing a crime scene. He was traveling with crates of plant specimens and spoke very fast. "You'll never get anything to grow in open ground this time of year," he said. "Nights are still killing cold. What you need is a thermal accumulator, dark mass that absorbs heat by day and releases it at night. The French use glass cloches. The Italians use stone walls painted black." He paused, studying the glittering ground. "Though I suppose any mass would do, if you had enough of it." He tipped his hat and drove away. Dinah stood very still for a long moment. Then she looked at the glass. That evening, Dinah spread every piece of glass they had collected onto the plank table, and the family stood around looking at it. There were perhaps 2 pounds of fragments, not nearly enough for anything. "It's pretty," Annie said helpfully. "Where did it even come from?" Gideon asked. Ephraim shrugged. "Freight wagons break things. Probably been dropping glass along this road for years." "So there's more," Dinah said. "Probably more along the whole road," Willa said, which was the useful observation Dinah had been waiting for. Ruth crossed her arms. "What exactly are you proposing?" Dinah told them. A wall, low, maybe 2 feet high, curved around 3 sides of the garden patch, mortared with mud and set with glass pieces facing south and west to catch maximum sun. A thermal mass, the botanist had called it, a way to hold warmth. The silence that followed was the considering kind, not the dismissive kind, which Dinah took as encouragement. "We don't have mortar," Ephraim said. "Gideon can figure out a mud mixture," Dinah said. Gideon looked alarmed and then thoughtful. "We'd have to walk the road," Ruth said. "Both directions, miles of it." "The road runs right along our property," Dinah said. "We can work outward from here, an hour each morning before the heat comes." "What if we build it and nothing grows anyway?" Seth asked. He meant it genuinely, not cruelly, which somehow made it harder to answer. Dinah looked at the bare garden patch through the window. The stakes were still in the ground, rotting and tilted like a little cemetery. "Then we're no worse off than we are now," she said. "But that man stopped and told us something for no reason except that he knew it. I think that means something." "What does it mean?" Annie asked. "That the answer was already here. We just had to hear it." Another silence, shorter this time. "I want to find the blue pieces," Annie announced, apparently having resolved the question to her satisfaction. Seth looked at Ephraim. Ephraim looked at Ruth. Ruth uncrossed her arms. "We start tomorrow," Ruth said, "before breakfast." They began at first light. Dinah led them east along the freight road with flour sacks and canvas buckets, the early sky pale gold above the mesa. Annie skipped ahead, stopping to crouch over every glint in the dirt. Seth ran to keep up with her. Willa walked slowly, systematically, missing nothing. Within an hour, Gideon had begun sorting pieces by color into different sacks without being asked. The road gave generously. Decades of wagon traffic had ground bottles, jars, and lamp chimneys into the margin, and the desert had preserved them perfectly. Dinah looked at her family strung along the road in the morning light and felt, for the first time since their father died, that they were moving toward something. The something had a name: Margaret Osley. She was 61, lived a quarter-mile north in a stone house she'd built herself, and appeared in their yard on day 2 of the glass collecting with a plate of cornbread and an expression of deep suspicion. "What are you children doing to my road?" she asked. Dinah explained. Margaret looked at the 2 pounds of sorted glass on the table, then at the 7 children, then back at Dinah. "You'll need better mud mix than anything you'll find here," she said. "I have lime." She went home and came back with a sack. The construction of the wall became the organizing fact of their days. Mornings belonged to the road. They developed a system without much discussion, the way children do when the work is interesting enough. Annie and Seth ranged ahead in a loose scout pattern, calling back when they spotted a concentration of glass. Willa followed behind them, with the methodical patience of someone twice her age, checking the margins they'd passed over. Gideon and Ruth worked the actual collection, filling sacks and sorting as they went. Ephraim carried the heavy loads. Dinah coordinated everything and kept track of the running total in a small notebook their father had used for planting records, now repurposed, his potato yield estimates crossed out and replaced with glass tallies. March 28th, 14 pounds amber, 9 pounds cobalt, 6 pounds green, 4 pounds red/cranberry, 2 pounds clear. Total, 35 pounds. Need estimate, 80 to 100 pounds. The road gave different things in different sections. Closer to the crossing itself, where wagon traffic was heaviest, they found mostly brown bottle glass, common and plentiful. A half-mile east, the ground yielded a surprising concentration of cobalt. Gideon theorized an old medicine shipment had broken up there, and the blue pieces were prized accordingly. Annie kept a small personal collection of the bluest fragments in her apron pocket and could be heard clinking when she walked. Margaret Osley came by most mornings, initially to supervise the mud and lime mortar mixture, which she had opinions about, and then increasingly, because she seemed to find the whole enterprise entertaining. She brought her own low stool and sat at the edge of the worksite, watching Gideon design the foundation course with the focused intensity of an engineer. "You've got a good eye for level," she told him one morning. Gideon looked up, startled. "My father taught me to read a slope." "He taught you well." Gideon went back to work, but sat a little straighter. The wall went up course by course. Gideon had designed a shallow curve, concave toward the garden, so the glass face would catch and concentrate reflected light toward the center of the planting bed. This was more sophisticated than Dinah had originally imagined, and she had needed to ask him twice whether he was certain before she accepted that yes, he had worked it out with a hand-drawn diagram, and he was certain. The glass was set into the mortar face out, flat pieces angled slightly upward to catch low sun. Ruth developed a technique for fitting irregular shards together like a mosaic, finding complementary edges and pressing them into the wet mud in patterns that were, Dinah realized one afternoon, actually beautiful. Cobalt beside amber, beside green. A cranberry piece like a gemstone at the center of each section. "You're making it pretty," Dinah said. Ruth looked mildly offended. "I'm making it efficient. The angles maximize surface area." But she had placed the cranberry pieces at the centers, which was not strictly necessary for surface area, and Dinah didn't press the point. By the end of the first week, the wall stood 14 inches high on 3 sides of the garden patch, south, east, and west, open to the north where the sod house blocked wind already. The glass face caught the afternoon sun and threw bands of colored light across the bare soil inside, amber and blue and green trembling over the pale dirt. Seth stood in the middle of it, looking at the light on his hands. "It's like being inside a rainbow," he said. "It's a wall," Ruth said. "It's both," Willa said firmly, which ended the debate. That evening, Dinah sat outside until the light failed, watching the last colors fade from the glass. The inside of the enclosure held warmth she could feel on her face from 3 feet away. Not dramatic heat, but a real, present gentleness, like standing near someone who meant well. She thought, "It's doing something." She thought, "Now we need seeds." Seeds were, it turned out, something Margaret Osley had opinions about. "Radishes," she said on the 8th morning, arriving with a small paper packet before Dinah had even asked. "Easiest thing God made. 3 weeks from seed to table, cold tolerant, and they tell you immediately if something's wrong. You start with radishes." Dinah took the packet. "What else?" "Nothing else until radishes succeed." She paused. "I might also have strawberry runners, but you earn those." The radish seeds went in on a Thursday. Dinah and Annie planted them together, Annie moving along the row with a gravity that Potato the cloth rabbit observed from a fence post. The soil inside the wall was different from the soil outside it. Dinah could feel it even through her gloves, a slight give, a faint warmth from the previous day's stored heat. They had worked a pound of Margaret's composted kitchen scraps into the bed, which was not much, but was what they had. "Will they know what to do?" Annie asked, looking at the tiny seeds in the furrow. "They know," Dinah said. "They've always known. We just have to make it possible." Annie covered the furrow with the solemnity of someone completing an important ceremony. The waiting was its own kind of work. Ruth organized a watering schedule, a measured half-cup per row, morning and evening, no more. Seth took the evening shift with a dedication that surprised everyone. He would stand at the wall's open north end and pour the water with such careful concentration that Dinah once watched him for 2 full minutes without him noticing. The freight road continued to provide. One morning, a passing teamster slowed to watch them working and asked what they were building. When Dinah explained, he reached into his wagon and produced a wrapped bundle of green glass pieces. "A broken lamp globe from 3 weeks ago," he said. "Been meaning to throw it out." He handed it down without stopping and drove on. On the 11th day, Willa found something in the road a full mile east, a deposit of amber glass so thick it was practically a layer, buried just under the dust. She came back at a run to get the others, and they spent the whole morning there, the 6 younger children working in a line while Dinah filled sack after sack. They had enough, it turned out, for a second wall section, a short wing extending north on the west side, creating a more sheltered internal corner. Gideon designed it in 20 minutes. They built it in 2 days. On the 14th morning, Seth came in from watering at a run. "Something's coming up," he said, with a catch in his voice that made everyone stop what they were doing. They went out together. Inside the wall, in 3 of the 4 rows, the soil had cracked in a thin line, and pushing through it, pale green, impossibly small, curved like a question mark, were the first radish seedlings. Annie made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Gideon crouched and looked at the nearest one for a long time without speaking. "They know," he said finally, which was what Dinah had told Annie, and she felt something move in her chest. That afternoon, Margaret Osley came by, saw the seedlings, looked at Dinah, and went home without a word. She came back an hour later with a flat of strawberry runners wrapped in damp burlap. "You've earned these," she said. She set them on the table and sat down on her stool and looked at the wall glittering in the late afternoon sun. The colored light fell across her face, amber, cobalt, green. "Your father filed on this claim 2 years ago," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Dinah said. "He came and asked me about the land. I told him it was hard ground." She paused. "I was right. But hard isn't the same as impossible." She looked at the wall a moment longer. "He would have liked to see this," she said. On the 20th day, Dinah counted 41 radish seedlings in the first 2 rows. Strawberry runners planted and already showing new leaf. Gideon had sourced climbing bean seeds from a freighter, who stopped to stare at the wall. The wall itself had become a landmark. 3 passing wagons in a single week had slowed, drivers standing up on the bench to look at the glittering colored glass throwing light across the garden. One had called down, "What in the world is that?" Ephraim, who was working nearby, had straightened up and without hesitation said, "That's our place." Dinah heard it and understood. They had stopped surviving. They had started becoming something. The trouble arrived, as most trouble does, without announcing itself. His name was Harlan Goss, and he held a neighboring claim to the north, a larger parcel he had grazed cattle on for 2 seasons before the grass failed. He arrived on a Tuesday morning on horseback, a lean man in his 40s with the squinting habit of someone who had spent years looking at land and calculating what it was worth. He stopped at the fence line and looked at the wall for a long time. "That's quite a thing," he said. Dinah thanked him. "I knew your father," he said. "Came by once, seemed like a decent man." He paused. "Must be hard, managing a claim your age. 7 of you, is it?" "We're managing," Dinah said. He looked at the wall again. The afternoon light was hitting it full on, and it was genuinely striking. The glass face throwing amber and cobalt reflections across the garden bed, the strawberry runners already putting out runners of their own, the beans beginning to curl up the twine Gideon had strung. "Thing is," Goss said, "I've been looking at the survey on this section. The freight road easement runs 15 feet from the road center. Your property line puts you right up against that easement on the east side." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. "I've also got a pre-existing water claim on this section from 1882, filed before your father's claim. Predates his deed." Dinah did not reach for the paper. "What are you saying, Mr. Goss?" "I'm saying the situation here is complicated." He folded the paper back up. "I might be willing to discuss a consolidation arrangement. You and the children could stay on the property, work it, and I'd handle the legal matters on your behalf. A straightforward share arrangement." "What share?" He said a number. After he rode away, Dinah stood at the fence for a long time. Then she went inside and found the deed and the survey documents in the tin box where their father had kept them. She spread them on the table and read everything twice, carefully, which was how she read anything she needed to understand. The water claim was real. She could see the 1882 date on the copy her father had retained with a note in his handwriting. "Goss claim. Predates mine. Need to verify scope and usage." Her father had known about it and apparently not resolved it. The easement was also real. 15 feet from road center, which did, depending on how the survey line fell, come close to the eastern wall section. She sat down. Ruth came in from the garden and found her sitting, and knew immediately. "What happened?" Dinah told her. Ruth sat down across from her, which was what Ruth did when she was thinking seriously. She didn't say anything for a while. "The water claim," she said finally. "Has he used that water?" "I don't know." "Because a claim you don't use. Father's deed annotations from 61 talked about abandonment. If he hasn't exercised the claim in years, I don't know enough law to know if that applies here." "Margaret might." Dinah looked up. "She's been here longer than anyone," Ruth said. "She built her own claim. She'd know." Dinah folded the documents back into the tin. Through the window, she could see the glass wall catching the low western light, throwing its colors across the garden bed where the beans were climbing. "I'll go tonight," she said. Margaret Osley listened to everything without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When Dinah finished, Margaret held out her hand for the tin box. Dinah gave it to her. Margaret read every document, slowly, including the margins, including her father's handwritten notes. "Your father was a careful man," she said. "Not careful enough, but careful. Can he take the property?" "No," Margaret said. She said it with the flat certainty of someone who had reached the end of a calculation. "He cannot take the property. The water claim predates your deed, but a water claim is not a land claim. He has a right to access the water source, depending on whether this," she tapped a page, "refers to the spring or the pump, and the spring dried up in 1884. I saw it myself. If it's the spring, the claim is moot. And if it's the pump, then there's a genuine usage question. But he'd need to demonstrate he's exercised the claim in the last 7 years. I have never seen Harlan Goss pump water from this property in 7 years of living here." She set the documents on the table. He is speculating that you don't know enough to challenge him. Dinah absorbed this. He's partly right, she said. Partly, but only partly. Margaret looked at her steadily. The easement issue is real, but only if the survey line falls where he says it does. Has anyone actually surveyed this property recently? Not that I know of. Then he doesn't know either. He's presenting a claim he hasn't verified as if it were settled. She paused. That's not illegal, but it tells you something about how he works. What do I do? You write him a letter. Polite, specific. You acknowledge receipt of his concerns. You note that you intend to verify the survey and the water claim usage record at the county seat. You say nothing about your actual conclusions. You give him no information. She paused again. And then you go to the county seat. That's 30 miles. It is. But the records are public, and the clerk is a reasonable woman named Mrs. Hargrove, who has no patience for claim jumpers. Margaret stood and went to her writing desk. I'll write you an introduction. She wrote it standing, without drafting, which told Dinah she was angrier than she was showing. The letter to Goss went out that evening with a freighter heading east, who said he knew the man and would deliver it personally, with what he described as a meaningful look. Dinah thanked him and stood in the road watching the wagon diminish. Ephraim appeared beside her. I want to go to the county seat, he said. I was going to ask you. I know, I'm offering. He was quiet for a moment. He's not going to take this place. No, Dinah said. He's not. But that night she lay awake listening to Seth's steady breathing in the bunk above Annie's and to the wind coming off the mesa, and she thought about all the ways things could go wrong that she hadn't foreseen yet. She had not foreseen the glass wall either, or the radishes, or Margaret. She had not foreseen a teamster handing down a broken lamp globe because he thought it was interesting. The world kept offering things she hadn't planned for. She thought, let it be that way in both directions. Through the window, faint and improbable, she could see the glass wall catching the moonlight, not blazing, just a gentle glitter, a low, steady gleam, like something that intended to remain. She slept. They came back from the county seat on the 4th day. Ephraim drove. Dinah held the documents in her lap, reading the clerk's annotations again to make sure she understood them. She understood them. The pump predated both claims. The spring had been formally recorded as dry since 1885, 1 year after Margaret had seen it fail. Goss's water claim was, as far as the county record was concerned, exercised against a source that no longer existed, and the survey on file placed the property line 4 inches inside the wall's eastern foundation. 4 inches. She closed her eyes. The margin had been so small. She thought, we nearly didn't know to look. They sat at the table that night, all 7 of them, the documents spread out between the lamp and the tin box. Dinah had explained everything twice, once in legal terms, once in plain ones. Annie was asleep against Ephraim's arm. Seth was looking at the papers with the expression of someone who wanted to understand and was working hard at it. So we're safe, Ruth said. It was not quite a question. For now, Dinah said. A man like Goss might try something else. We need to be clear-eyed about that. But the wall, he can't claim it. It's on our land. It's ours. Willa had been very quiet. Now she said, I keep thinking about how close it was. 4 inches. I know. What if Father had set the foundation 4 inches east? He didn't, Dinah said. But he almost did. He didn't know. Willa looked at her hands. We could have lost it and never known why. The room was quiet. Outside, The night wind moved across the mesa. Dinah thought about her father's handwriting in the margins of the deed. Goss claim. Predates mine. Need to verify. He had known there was something to worry about. He had simply not had the time to finish worrying about it. She had finished it for him. "We know now," she said. "That's what matters." In the morning, Dinah wrote 2 letters. The first was to Harlan Goss. It was brief, accurate, and contained the county clerk's reference numbers. It did not say we will not be moved. It didn't need to. The second was to the county land office, requesting a formal boundary survey at their expense. It would take most of their remaining cash reserves. Ruth did not argue about it. "Evidence," Ruth said simply, when Dinah explained. "Evidence," Dinah agreed. They sealed both letters and gave them to the morning's first freighter heading east. Then they went out to the garden. The radishes came in on a Saturday. Seth found the first one at morning watering, a globe of deep red pushing itself out of the soil in the far corner of the first row, round and emphatic and almost comically cheerful. He did not run back to get everyone. He stood there looking at it for a full minute, and then he picked it up and held it in his palm and looked at it some more, and by the time Dinah came out to find him, he had tears running down his face, which he was not remotely embarrassed about. "It's a radish," he said, and his voice was full of everything. "It is," Dinah said. By afternoon, they had pulled 23. Ruth arranged them on the table in a line and stood back and looked at them with the expression she used when she was trying not to show that she was moved. Gideon counted them twice. Annie ate 3 in a row without washing them first, which Dinah allowed. Margaret Osley arrived at the gate as if summoned, though no one had sent for her. She came in, looked at the table, picked up one of the radishes, and turned it in her fingers. "Good size," she said. "Solid root. This soil will grow." She set it back on the table and did not say anything else for a moment. "I want to talk to you about something," she said then to Dinah. "I have a kitchen garden on the north side of my property that gets better sun than my current beds, but I'm too old to break new ground. If you're willing to extend your planting operation, I'll share the water from my east cistern. It's fed by a good spring. Nothing to do with any Goss claim." She said the last 3 words with a precision that indicated she had not forgiven Harlan Goss. "In exchange, I'd want a portion of the yield, to be negotiated." Dinah looked at her for a moment. "We'd want an equal share," she said. Margaret made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You would. You have the water. We have the labor and the method. Equal share. Your method is a wall made of broken glass from the side of a road. And it's growing radishes in April in Utah Territory. So." Margaret looked at her steadily. Then she said, "Equal share," and held out her hand. They shook on it. The surveyor arrived 11 days later, a taciturn man from the county seat named Fletcher, who spent an entire day placing stakes and consulting charts and saying things like, in a tone that revealed nothing. By the end of the day, he had established the eastern property line conclusively. The wall's foundation sat 6 inches inside the Vale claim, not 4. The earlier county file had been slightly in error. Fletcher produced a stamped document, accepted Dinah's payment, and said, "You've got a well-sited piece of ground here, miss. Nice wall." He drove away. Dinah held the document and breathed. The letter from Goss arrived 2 weeks later. It was brief. He acknowledged the survey results. He expressed no further interest in consolidation arrangements. It was the most polite letter she had ever disliked. She filed it in the tin box anyway. Evidence. The strawberry runners bloomed in May, This was not supposed to happen. First-year runners generally put energy into roots, not fruit. But the wall's warmth had apparently convinced them that conditions were favorable enough to take the risk. The first small white flowers appeared on a Tuesday, and by Friday, there were blooms across every plant. Willa discovered them and called everyone out, and they stood inside the wall in the morning light with the colored glass throwing amber and cobalt and green across their faces and boots, looking at the small white flowers as if they were a form of impossible news. "They shouldn't," Gideon said. "They did anyway," Annie said, which was perhaps the most important thing said on the property that month. The beans climbed. Gideon built a second trellis from scrap lumber a freighter left behind after one of his wagon boards cracked, and he needed to lighten the load. The beans reached the top of the trellis by late May and began to set pods, long and pale green, hanging between the leaves like small flags. Passing freighters had by now fully accepted the wall as a landmark. The glass place, they called it when giving directions among themselves, which Dinah learned secondhand from a driver who stopped to buy 3 dozen radishes and volunteered the information cheerfully. He bought the radishes for 10 cents, which was the first money the Vale claim had produced in its history. Ruth wrote the 10 cents in the account book with a steadiness that Dinah suspected cost her some effort. The expansion to Margaret's north bed happened in early June. Ephraim broke ground. Gideon designed a second wall, smaller, L-shaped, using the remaining glass from the original road collection, plus a fresh cache Willa had found a mile west. Annie selected the placement of the cranberry pieces in the new mosaic face. On a warm evening in the second week of June, Dinah stood between the two walls and looked at what they had made. The original garden held radishes in their second planting, beans curling and heavy, strawberry plants spreading steadily across the bed, the first real strawberries just beginning to blush. The new bed held starter plants from Margaret's own seed stock, herbs, salad greens, a row of beets. Margaret was sitting on her low stool at the edge of the work, as she had most evenings for 2 months. She had brought coffee tonight, which she shared with Ephraim and Ruth, and she was telling them something about her own first season on her claim that Dinah couldn't hear from where she stood, but that was making Ruth laugh. Ruth laughing was not a common sound. It was a good one. Dinah looked at the walls. She looked at the garden. She looked at her brothers and sisters. Seth earnestly describing something to Annie. Willa crouching to examine a bean pod. Gideon making a note in his small book of designs. She thought about the freight road, grinding past their eastern fence all day long, carrying the world through the desert. She thought about how many pieces of broken glass must have fallen from wagons over the years, unnoticed, just lying in the alkaline dirt and catching the sun, waiting. She thought about Mr. Aldous Ferris, who had stopped to water his horse and said any mass would do, and then driven away, never knowing. She thought about her father, who had filed on 40 acres of hardpan with cheerful confidence, and who had written need to verify in the margins of his deed, and who had not had time to do it, but had still passed the land to his children, which meant he had passed this wall and these beans and these strawberries to his children, even if he hadn't known it. She thought, that's what it is to give something. You don't always see what it becomes. By midsummer, a photograph was taken by a traveling portraitist who had heard about the glass wall from 3 different freighters and come 20 miles out of his way to see it. He set up his equipment and asked them to stand together in front of the wall. They held up the strawberries because Annie suggested it, and everyone agreed. 7 children. A wall of colored glass blazing in the July sun, the desert brown and enormous behind them. Their faces said, "We did this." The photograph exists. It sits on the mantelpiece in the sod house alongside a tin box and a document with a surveyor's stamp and a single dried radish that Seth asked to keep.